It all began with an idea: to create a festival where women's voices are uplifted and celebrated. 200 cultural events, and 30 years later, the Sor Juana Festival lives on. From international theater premieres to renowned musical performances, this festival has showcased the incredible contributions of women across disciplines and the world. And because of you, our artists, attendees, and supporters, the festival continues to thrive. Join us in celebrating the 31st annual Sor Juana Festival. Here's to another year of honoring artists, writers, performers, thinkers, visionaries who continue to redefine narratives through impact. The Sor Juana Festival is a testament to what happens when women lead, create, and inspire. Let's keep making history together. Vamos.
Activators, artists, community members that care, and so we're very excited to have you here.
Well, thank you for doing this, and thank you all for, what day is it today? Tuesday, Wednesday, I don't even know anymore, but it truly means so much that you all took the time to come. I know this is a beautiful space, so we don't need more excuses, but it does mean the world that, you know, there's so much intention behind this, and so truly thank you for doing this, really, and then to you.
Okay, so tonight's conversation is going to be rooted in the values of conversation and getting to know Paola, talking about defectors, talking about issues that have risen and have been in our community for a while. So first, we're gonna, like I said, ask a couple questions to Paola, and then we're gonna transition into defector-based questions. So, are you ready?
Let's do it, yes.
All right. All right, Paola, this question is very important. It's, you know, I need to know, what's your zodiac sign?
So I'm on the cusp. I'm January 20th, and so I believe, well, I know I've always thought of myself as a Capricorn.
Right.
But the more I get into, you know, like anything. Astrology, and when life goes wrong, I am now getting more into it. So allegedly, I guess I'm on the cusp. Right. And so now things are starting to make more sense, which means that I'm a very complicated human, not easy to be in a relationship with, like all those things. Or so I hear.
You're wonderful.
No, I'm serious, yeah. Well, you tell me. You know what does that mean? January 20th.
Yeah, January 20th. I love Capricorn, so shout out to any Capricorns out in the crowd. My mom's a Capricorn, my sister is a Capricorn, so you guys are very dedicated, very diligent, very down to do the work, and so I appreciate that. And then
negatives?
Aquarius, no negatives.
Okay.
I love you guys. And then Aquarius is very free-minded and open-spirited, and so that's a beautiful cusp to have, allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Paola. Entonces, hemos escuchado que, the descriptions and everything, but I would like for you to tell us who Paola Ramos is through your words and your journey.
Yeah. So I think for me, the story starts with my parents. No?
Right.
My father is a Mexican journalist. My mother's a Cuban journalist. That connection never works. The Cuban and the Mexican love story, it truly never works. But it is a beautiful story because they both came to the United States with the same purpose. And I think in my father's case, it was to find a little bit more of that freedom of speech here that he couldn't find in Mexico in the 80s. My mother comes from a family of Cuban exile. She was born in Havana. My grandfather was a political prisoner for many years, and so that story takes them to Miami.
Oh, wow.
So my parents had this beautiful 2-minute love story from where I was born, literally.
I love it.
As a journalist,
Right.
but I do. It is at the heart of who I became. No?
Right.
My whole life were discussions around the importance of journalism, which means the importance of understanding what that power involves. No,
Right.
If you have a pen, if you have a mic, if you have any platform, I was always told, no, you have a responsibility to hold people accountable. That was it. From the political aspect of it all, my grandfather's mission was always to sort of he was obsessed with democracy and so I know, which today is now I understand what he meant. And so I was born in Miami, grew up in Madrid. Went sort of ping-ponged my whole life to visit my dad in Miami, and so through the years, I've started to understand that all of those different identities, being Latina, being queer, growing up in Spain, that I think for so many years I kind of put in corners. I finally it's taken a while, but I'm starting to understand that you can hold everything together.
Yes, and that's super important that not having to choose, just one thing. I think that's something that almost in the new consciousness of I don't know if it's because of what's happening politically or just us as becoming more in tune with ourselves, not just having to stick to one category or something like that. Okay, so I definitely you've worked on extensive projects. I'm just curious to see what has been your favorite thing you've done, whether it's a campaign, writing Defectors, writing your other book. What has
not
been...
writing Defectors? that was tough. We'll get into that. I think my favorite, I guess the most challenging story and the one that I'm most proud of was, so actually this will make sense because I'll give you two examples.
Okay.
So January 20th, 2021 is when Joe Biden was being inaugurated, right after 4 years of Trump. That day, my team and I were beginning the trek inside the Darien, no? So obviously Darien is that 60-mile jungle between Colombia and Panama.
Oh my goodness.
And I mentioned the date because I think it very much reflected the time that we were in. No? We were embedded with mostly Cuban and Haitian asylum seekers that were beginning that trek. That specific part of the trek is within Colombia, so it's completely controlled by Clan del Golfo. You literally cannot move through that jungle without their blessing. So their blessing, and then you're completely surrounded by very dangerous wildlife. What I loved about that story is that, there's obviously immense sadness to it, but it is, and I think now I understand how profound it was, no? To really answer the question of what does it take for a mother to hold her babies, to begin a journey that takes 10 days, only to reach the United States. You have to be so driven by this. It's cheesy, fine, but by these ideals of the American dream, no? And so every time throughout that journey, the question was does this make sense? Do you is it worth it? No? People around you aren't making it through this trek. Is it worth it? And the answer was always yes.
Right.
And so in terms of reporting and production, like that is a story that I'm very proud of. And then I mentioned the date because then where did I find myself 4 years later, January 20th, 2025, and that tells the story. You know, that day what I was covering was a January 6th pardon watch party in Miami. And just think of how different that story is. No, there the story that I was covering was how all these Proud Boys, all these January 6ers in Miami-Dade County, mostly Cubans, some Venezuelans, many of them that were wearing el grillete, no, and they were waiting anxiously for Trump to pardon them. And so the whole story, you know, became around this, again, like this new version of America, but also perhaps the beginning of this realization of like, truly, is this the beginning of the end of this American dream? Was there ever an American dream? Is it time to redefine that? And so that's what keeps me up at night these days, no? Like, how do you make sense of all of that?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. That was very, very deep for us. You might have hit on this in that, but as a journalist, what motivates you? You know, when things get hard, you know, what is it? Is there a defining factor that, you know, gets you up and like, let's do it?
I think it's changed. No, I think before, I think when I started, and this is always a foundation for me. And I think for most journalists, like the hardest part of my job and our job and so many people here is to gain like genuine trust from people. And I think that takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And it's very gratifying when you do it well. No? And you can always tell them those stories. I think now my job, unfortunately, is to really try and break down stories in the most simple ways because we are no longer working in the same media landscape. And so I just literally find myself repeating, like my stories have become almost more basic, no, and my reporting has become more basic, but I think my role right now is just like pushing back with facts and facts and facts and truth. So that's, I think the scale is changing because it's a vastly, and I can't even like, I cannot stress enough. I mean, I don't have to tell anyone here like how vastly different the media landscape is right now. Know what we're up against, right? Which is not just a media landscape where mis and disinformation have become the norm, and it has become the norm reinforced with a government that is doing an extremely good job, I have to say, as sort of tricking us all, no, to buy into their TV spectacle, and that's a really hard thing to confront. It's like how do you inform 50% of Americans that for the last 4 years believed that Joe Biden was not the legitimate president? You know what I'm saying? Like how do you talk to over 50% of Americans that believe in the Great Replacement theory? How do you undo that? It's an immense thing to tackle for all of us.
Wow, yeah, that definitely resonates with a lot of like the stuff that we do on ground level in communities. So,
and that I have to say that like I think the folks on the ground have what I'm learning too. No, so much more power than what I will ever have. True community organizers, the true you know, like the true people on the ground, like that I think is what really is going to help us. Like no one, unfortunately, like no one is listening to us anymore. You know? And
I love that you mentioned that too, because in community and book club, as we mentioned, I think that's the perfect example of like how cultivating those values really does make a change. It really does help you get that narrative out there. Again, like we need we need the Paola Ramos of the world, but we also need the people of the community to, you know, put that and inform each other amongst each other. So kind of shifting a little bit, what is your favorite thing about being a Latina? I need to know. You have a lot of intersectionalities and.
I'll give you. Okay, I'll tell you what I thought I had to be and then what I became.
Yes.
I remember when was this? This must have been like 2015. And this is like the first time that I go on Telemundo.
Oh my
you know
goodness.
Where the story is headed. Yeah. And I'm on Telemundo, and this is like the first time I'm doing TV, so I'm like so excited. And And I remember, I think it was in Miami, which then the story makes more sense. I was in Miami, and then the makeup artist is like, just sit in the chair, like, you're gonna look great. And yeah, and so I sit, and you know, the backstory is like, I grew up in my father, he used to work in Univision. Right. I grew up in that environment, you know, where the image of what it meant to be a Latina was very much, you know, just, I had a very specific image of what it meant to be us. You know, what it meant to be us, what it meant to talk like us, the issues that I could talk about, the way that I was supposed to love. And so, you know, all of this was kind of ingrained in my head. And so by the time that I'm sitting in this Telemundo like makeup chair, I was like, do whatever you want. Like, I want to do whatever, like, I want to be who you want me to be. And I remember, like, within 5 minutes, I look up, and I looked insane. Like, she literally, like, I had this, like, I looked insane, but I looked like the women that I had grown up watching and that were, like, sometimes dating my father, you know? Like, seriously. And this stays between us, but it's true.
Wow, Betty.
But it's true, and I love all of them. But literally, like, so my hair was like this. I had so much mascara. Like, I looked insane. And they were like, you look beautiful. And I was like, I love drag queens, but I was like, I look like a drag queen. I did. And I remember I went on TV, and I was so uncomfortable. Yeah. So uncomfortable. And even my mom was like, don't ever do that again. And so I think, no, it was bad. My dad, of course, was like, you look great. But I was like, yeah. But so I think the beauty of owning that, no, yes, and kind of remaking that image to who I truly am. I mean, that's something, you know, that my grandmothers, both my Mexican grandmother and my Cuban grandmother, have done time and time again. You know, reimagining yourself, reimagining these voices, and like I feel proud of. It took me like a year to be comfortable in these spaces, right, to look however I wanted to look, to talk about what I wanted to talk about. I feel like in those spaces, I remember so many times it would be like, don't say no digas nada de los abortos, no? Yes. That word is, you can't talk about that. And for so many years, like, I would tiptoe around these issues, you know, don't talk about gay people. And to finally have the freedom to do that, and then to find out that, like, as a community, like, we are driven by empathy, no? Yes. We underestimate, like, how compassionate we can be. And that eventually, that's sort of where I found that pride, no? That has always been there.
Right, yeah. That's truly amazing.
I can show you photos.
Yeah, I actually saw.
I'll show you.
You
saw it?
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah.
To me, you look good.
No, I did not look good.
The highlight was highlighting. She looked.
It was crazy. Yeah.
But I appreciate that. Well, is that okay?
No, it's
yeah. So, you know, you did like allude to that, but again, just to reiterate, what do you think is the, or what advice would you give Latinas trying to find that voice? You know, you hit on a couple like aspects of that, but to really drive that home, I know sometimes, like you said, we are told from society, like, don't be too loud, don't be yourself, and all of these capabilities. What advice, like, do you think concretely we could give Latinas to dismantle that and like be proud of being who they are, and, you know, honor that journey of themselves? Yeah,
I mean, I think today, like, I think most people, understand their power and their worth. I think it's a matter of, like, when we step in certain spaces, like, then we start to you know, to feel unvalued, no? Yes. I think for many years, understandably, no, we've been fighting, and I think we're in this, like, very unique spot, sweet spot, no, where suddenly this balance of power is shifting. Yeah. And I think no longer, and obviously now it's Trump's America, so, like, obviously things are shifting, but even within that, like, no longer is there any success in any metric in any industry without our voices, like, truly, yes. No? That wasn't the case 5 years ago, maybe not even 4 years ago, but today, there's no formula out there without having us on the table. And so I think truly understanding that, even if it's, like, from a purely, like, selfish perspective, like, transactional perspective, like, we have to be in the table, no? Yeah. And so I think then our jobs is to bring people with us. But it's just, like, fundamentally understanding how that balance is completely shifting and just reminding people.
Right, and like you said, the need to, like, we have to be at that table, and I love that. I love that transition. And yeah, it kind of reminds me of like my journey in undergrad and being in
what
all
was
these
it like?
spaces where I felt like I had to be quiet. You know, there was, you know, male dominated, Anglo-Saxon, and so, but then you realize like you wouldn't be in those spaces either if, you know, you couldn't do it or you were not called to do that work. And I love what you said too about bringing people with you as well. Through the power of community and those values, I've seen that, and that's how I learned to, you know, really connect with community. Like, you know, you have an opportunity or you're taught, you know, empowerment, then you go out there and you teach and you give back to the community.
And in no way am I saying that this is easy or that it's done. No. And I within that have an immense privilege. So I understand how this may come across, but even with this privilege, like I still fight every day for people to like in these networks to like pay attention. But what I am saying is that even just like in our brains, we can shift something. Like perhaps that manifests differently. You know?
Yeah, I definitely understand that. Okay, that was awesome. I love that. Okay, so now we're going to transition more into defector-based questions. And so, Defectors, as it was mentioned, we have a book club at Pilsen Arts and Community House. We meet every Monday.
So cool, yeah.
Shout out to my book club.
Where's the book club? Okay.
Guys,
cool.
You should come, Paola.
I will, yeah.
There every Monday at 7 p.m. Just a little backstory about that. It completely changed my life. It came at a time where I was desperately searching for community, searching for friends, for that transformation. Not only friends, but friends in alignment, right? Because I think it's important to have different types of friends, but friends that, like, if you're creative, if you're, you know, a writer, musician, to be surrounded by that creativity, to be surrounded by that love, because it inspires you to, you know, create and hone your own craft. And so through that book club, we established a lot of lessons through dialogue, open dialogue. And so in November, you know, we're seeing...
November,
I know,
like,
dramatic pause.
What happened?
It was awful, no.
So serious,
Yeah, well...
I mean, this book, I mean, I risked it, because it could have gone the other way.
Yes, and so... Perfect timing.
No,
too.
but awful timing.
Absolutely.
Awful.
Well, yeah, awful, but
yeah.
So then in book club, you know, we vote, and like the members will bring, you know, options, and we'll vote unanimously together. And so Defectors, that was my first like encounter with it, right? A member brought it, and you know, we were all like discussing the different options, and it came out to be the winner. And so it was just announced too that Donald Trump had won the presidency. And so we were desperately searching for advocacy literature. We needed that. I knew as a community organizer that there was going to have to be a preparation period. And like I said, in book club, there's community members, there's community leaders, there's just people that care in general about what's going on. And so I definitely was like, okay, let's do it. But nothing could have prepared me for the first 30 days of Donald Trump's presidency. So on one hand, you know, we're seeing all of this like fear, this anti-immigration rhetoric, like being spewed into the media, like scaring me, scaring all of us in community. But in our other hand, we had your book, and through your book, we found that it was just fear, right? That what he was doing was using those tactics that you go through very well, like through the narratives of the people that you interview, and we were able to almost like dismantle all of that like illusion of like disgust and fear. And so it was such a beautiful, like, again, it was very difficult, right, to deal with the tough emotions, but it was also very empowering and very important for us to have them at the same time. And so I want to thank you specifically for that.
No, thank you guys for reading it in the book. No, truly.
So yeah. So as that happened, we, like I said, we started to go into dialogue. We started to activate. We did a couple of based, like community resistant projects, which led into a bigger thing. You know, we went to a couple of people's marches, and we also did a benefit show. So it was definitely something that was very inspiring to us. But I would like to start off.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, of course.
Only because I think this will help us, at least me, as we think about the discussion. Even just if I ask you guys, like, just two questions, like, starting with you. Okay. Were you guys surprised that Trump won? A, and B, were you surprised at the numbers, the sort of the Latino numbers? So let's start with the first one. Like, were you surprised?
Absolutely not.
Were you? No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And number two?
The numbers did kind of shock
Yeah.
me. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna lie, being a little bit more transparent, but no, Donald Trump winning, not at all,
Okay.
especially because of their first term.
Yeah. Okay.
I saw that happen in college, so I was 19, 20, and they did a poll, and Donald Trump did not win, but when the facts came out, he won. And so I remember the campus just being completely eerie, and like completely, we were all distraught.
Yeah.
But I remember reading a quote that stayed with me with this presidential election, and it was, "America got the president they deserved," and that never left me. And so when he won this time, I'm like, obviously, like, he unpacked and like unleashed all of that internalized racism and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. Did the numbers shock you guys? No. No. Okay.
Yeah.
Couple yes and no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would like to start off. The title of the book, Defectors. Why Defectors?
So to defect is it's the act of abandoning a presumed loyalty. No? And so it's almost like a play of words. I think for so long, what I believed also working in politics, and perhaps what I still believe now, is that our community was bound by this presumed loyalty. Forget even the Democratic Party, but at least to a presumed loyalty to some ideals. Ideals that I think most people would agree that were about sort of pushing this country through this like multiracial, diverse coalition that we were all supposed to be part of. The ideal or the story was that we were loyal to this vision of like a better version of this country. A better version of this country, I think, meant, and again, right, like we were all, I think for years, no, it meant more equality, more justice, more empathy, more compassion, and more freedom for all of us. And so then, what does it mean, if you take away that presumption and you let people run loosely, and you stop kind of voting in the same way that your father and your mother and your grandmother did. No? What does it mean to take away all those assumptions? The idea of defection then becomes more normalized and prevalent in our community in ways that I think are hard to see. Obviously, the story, obviously Latinos voted overwhelmingly for the Democrats, right? Like that is still the case. That will continue to be the case. Like she overwhelmingly won this vote. But I think it's a mistake to not be alarmed by this idea that someone like Trump, after 4 years of what we saw, after talking in the way that he did, after promising mass deportations, after saying very clearly that someone like him would get anywhere between 40 to 45%. And so I think to not be slightly concerned, I think does a disservice to I think the work that we have to do to understand us better, no? And so it's simply just saying like the act of defecting is actually within us, no? And it doesn't mean that we're like divided. It just means that like there's this tendency to want to approximate ourselves to another version and another ideal of America, and we just have to confront that. Like that's it.
Bring it up to the table, bring it into the communities, bring it into our dialogue, which is really what the book does, and it does an exceptional job of that. And so again, the book is split up into 4 parts, tribalism, traditionalism, trauma, and the way forward. Could you explain to us why you did that and like how you even found those titles and made sense of all of the narratives that you went through?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this book is like 60 to 70% was based on reporting that I was doing, no? This was between like, this is like already at like in 2020 that I start to see, wait a second, like this man did 10 points better with Latinos that he did in 2016. And so for 3 years I'm reporting, really not even making sense of this, but then I start to see this trend, no? At the border, I start to see this like rise in anti-immigrant rhetoric in very subtle ways also, no? Nothing like explicit in the ways that we would think, but in very subtle ways, no? This like very heavy like anti-immigrant rhetoric. I see it at the border, I see it in the Bronx, I see the colorism, I see the racism. Again, nothing new, but it's just more in your face. Then I spent a lot of time within more of these like evangelical circles and spending more time like within these churches, spending more time with some of the figures within the like the culture war, groups, Moms for Liberty, the Proud Boys, And then, obviously, because this is more personal, like the whole idea of fleeing communism, particularly coming from like a Cuban American family that is completely split, no?
Yeah.
Half of my family don't love Trump, the other Cubans love Trump. But again, no, to understand the role of that political trauma and perhaps how we have also been conditioned to believe in strongman rule.
Yeah.
And so once I figured out like all these people that I was interviewing, then I figured out the buckets. No, tribalism is really about this, like, where does this internal racism come from?
Yes.
Traditionalism is just purely trying to make a little bit more sense of the weight of colonialism and how we carry that with us, and how so much of that really shaped the culture wars and how many of us moved through that. Why like transphobia became such a like easy message for Republicans to weaponize among our communities, no? Because they knew. And then of course the political trauma is making sense of why, you know, in a Miami-Dade County, for instance, Democrats kept trying to link Trump to un caudillo, no? Or link Trump to un dictador. And Democrats were like, that's definitely gonna work. It never worked. It didn't work. And then they started, they did that in the Rio Grande Valley, and they did that in California, and it doesn't work. And that's because underneath it all, we have a very complicated relationship with these figures in Latin America. And so that's kind of how honestly, I was just like bucket. Like it wasn't like
I love that.
more,
though.
yeah.
It was a word.
No.
And so, you know, like meeting all these Latinos, voting for the far right, how was that experience? Like, obviously then the, you know, like the obvious response. What was that like? I could only imagine. Also, kudos to you for that emotional intelligence and holding it down, because I could only imagine, you know.
Well, it was both like, I mean, I'll give you guys examples, and then I'll talk about Enrique Tarrio, the Proud Boy, you know, the chairman, because I think he's such an interesting character. Like, I met people from so many of the Proud Boys, January 6ers, pastors that are, you know, Christian nationalists, you know, some of these like white nationalists, like pro-Confederates. Like, I met a bunch of different people. But I think the through line of it all, or at least what I was trying to do is really to tell us that the line from where we stand to the far right can be more seamless than we think. No, we think it's this like massive pivot, but it's really not. And to me, the far right, and I get a lot of pushback, like George W. Bush won 40% of the Latino vote. He won it with a pro-immigrant story, and Republicans typically get between like 30 and 35% of the vote. So that, I mean, it's not like, you know, you can sensationalize that all you want, but like we have typically also voted for Republicans, 30%. But to me, the world of Trumpism, I define that as a far right. No, like I think there's like, I think it's hard to come back from that. But to answer your question, it's interesting, like a bunch of these guys, you know, like the border vigilantes, like the Proud Boys, what is it, like Libs for TikTok, like their personas online are scary, you know? And they have these like big personas and these like big platforms, and they're like retweeting Fox and Joe Rogan. And so I think walking into these interviews, I would get very nervous.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And of course, no, and you're literally stepping into these rooms where you're literally staring at people that fundamentally like disavow of who you are as a queer person, as the radical media, who your team is, no, because I come, you know, there's like producers in this, and so who you represent, you know that they don't value you or respect you. And so once you get through that, I would say the through line of most of them is that they are deeply insecure, deeply.
Yes.
And then it becomes like, then out of curiosity, then you can get to like the heart of what makes them sort of want to put this like face on. And I mentioned Enrique Tarrio because he, to me, is the perfect example of someone that like fell in love with the power. And when he fell in love with the power, that like that just like radicalized him when he tasted power.
Right.
Enrique Tarrio, like, this dude is from Miami. I'm from Miami. We grew up literally like a couple blocks away from each other. Most of Miami looks like me, no? Super privileged, Cuban American little elite bubble. And Enrique Tarrio, as a black Cuban man, does not walk freely in the streets of Miami. It's just the reality. Like, Miami can be an extremely, extremely racist place where the idea of blackness is completely erased. So Enrique Tarrio is someone that literally, like, and he would tell me, you know, like, no one was knocking on his door. You know, he was too black to be a Republican, too radical to be a Democrat. And so this guy was kind of like this lonely person. And so in the Proud Boys, he finds something, you know? He finds this like bro-ness of community, which is also like, they're the lamest people I've ever met, which is like a whole other story of like, when I first was introduced to the Proud Boys, like, in their words, Mecca, it was insane. It was like a garage where they were like drinking beer, and they think it's like the coolest thing ever. Now the threat is in the violence of their words and what they can, you know, do. But in the moment, you're like, these guys are losers, and they are. They're truly.
They are.
But then comes Trump, and then comes all these people that see all these, you know, sort of Latinas in these spaces and have understood really well how to like weaponize them to their advantage, you know? So that they become these like token sort of faces in this like right-wing world to shield sort of white supremacy from being called racist, you know? And it becomes this like, but it's that formula is replicated everywhere. And guess what? Enrique Tarrio now is nowhere. I mean, the man, when I saw him January 23rd, he literally was like, oh yeah, Trump is gonna call me and I'm gonna get a job at the White House. I'm like, okay. No one called him. So that's what I'm saying, right? Like, it's very tenuous. No, they understand somewhere along the line that it's this white power is like very tenuous, and I think that's the entry point for us. No, that you can have conversations with people somewhere there. Sorry, that was super long.
No, that was beautiful. I think it's so interesting how, you know, in my experience as a Chicana, it's like, I felt that, right? As a Chicana, Mexican-American, like, oh, I'm too Mexican for the United States, and I'm too American for Mexico. Right. But I think it's like, you know, it's plays on that idea too, that like, we're all searching for that. We're all going through that belonging and search for belonging. And I think exactly how you said Enrique Tarrio's story, it definitely exemplifies it oppositely. So it's very
right. And so many of us find belonging in the right ways, and we find community. Some people find it in the Proud Boys, others find it in like the way their like border patrol uniform makes them feel. Others find it when like Trump gives them a, you know, like makes them feel special for a second. But yeah, I think you're right. Like it's all about finding belonging somewhere.
Yeah, that's insane. Okay. So in chapter 2, Don Quixote's Fantasy, we're introduced to the term fantasy heritage. This is something that truly, I remember when we brought it up in book club, I was truly shocked. I was floored. I had seen this happen, you know, with people in my community that claim to like Spaniard and like our Spaniard heritage and the colonization of our minds and our history. But could you explain to us a little bit more what fantasy heritage is and the true dangers of it if we don't truly like address it and like put it on the table to discuss?
Yeah, so fantasy heritage, I also like you, the beauty for me of all this is that I learned so much through all of this, no? And looking back, it's crazy, like having been in politics and in these circles, like I wish, no, that I would have done this homework back then in a better way. But fantasy heritage, I was introduced by that term by this professor called Frank Perez from University of El Paso. Yes. Okay. And essentially, again, it makes sense. Huh? Like but fantasy heritage simply means like our tendency as a community to whitewash our past, no? To sort of see our history through a very Eurocentric lens. Right. The way that is manifested is in many different ways, right? Like even, let's say, like, okay, this is a dumb example, but as I told you guys, like I grew up in Madrid, no? And so I have a very, very thick Spanish accent. I just like never, I don't doubt it. But it never left me, you know? So I was in Madrid, like with my mom from 2 until 16, and so my accent is fucking nuts. It's like very deep. Entonces cuando hablo español, hablo como una española. Y tengo un acento muy español. Mi padre habla como un mexicano, mi madre habla como una cubana, pero yo hablo así y no se me va el acento. Entonces, cuando estoy haciendo entrevistas, a veces, me sale la C, no sé qué, me sale la Z. Sí. Y hay veces cuando estoy hablando, por ejemplo, con inmigrantes o con cualquier persona y me dice, no, es que tu español es el correcto, me encanta tu español, no el mío, no el mexicano, no el venezolano, no el nicaragüense, tú eres lo que, o sea, tú eres el ejemplo de eso. That's a form of fantasy heritage, no? And yes, like I've been so many times at the board, and I'm sure many of us have encountered that in different ways, no? Where people will present to me as, you know, yo soy un español.
Yeah.
And again, who am I to judge? No? Like everyone can make that line however they want, but like, that's how I'll say it. That's how I'll say, like, I can barely claim it, okay? But like, but truly though. And so I think, now the interesting thing is when we're thinking about like Latinos in white nationalist spaces, the entry point into white nationalism or white supremacy or any form of extremism for any people, regardless of their ethnicity and like their race, like for many Latinos, the research shows that it is through that very simple term of fantasy heritage, where they introduce themselves in these circles as soy fulanito de cual, but I am the descendant of Spaniards. And that's always the in, no? And everyone that I talk to, throughout, I mean, until now, no? There's always a tendency, for instance, Enrique Dario loves to say, I'm 40% Spanish and 60% black. But he can never not say that he's 40% Spanish, no? And that is his entry point into those worlds, you know, to claim this Europeanness. And then I think where it gets twisted, you know, is that it's all in our heads, no? Obviously, not to get into history at all, but like, that is what we carry, you know, this like institutionalized caste system, where obviously like enslaved folks were all the way at the bottom, followed by indigenous people and white people. That leads to mestizaje. And so that idea of mestizaje becomes, I think, this illusion of racelessness in Latin America that allows so many people to always draw that direct line to whiteness. No? Regardless of what you look like, regardless of who you are, you can always make that claim. And I think we come from many countries where this idea of like reclassifying race has been part of society, you know, like from Puerto Rico to even Mexico. Like in Puerto Rico, and I say this in the book, but like in Puerto Rico, literally there were like, they institutionalized in the 18th century, you know, the Spaniards allowed like black Puerto Ricans to pay them money to change their race. And so then the Puerto Rican government in like I think it was like 1910, like in a census, they allowed over 100,000 black Puerto Ricans to change their race. So by 1920, those 100,000 Puerto Ricans that were black were officially white. And so this we carry all this crap, for lack of a better word, with us here, no? And then we come to an America, of course, that criminalizes blackness and brownness. And when you're used to or capable of doing this kind of racial dance, no? Then when it's convenient, a lot of people, when Trump says you're part of us, people will be like, I am, you know? Regardless if you're black or you're brown, but internally, like we believe that, no? Because there's this like proximity to this history that is very complicated and brutal, but it is part of our psychology. And I'm not saying that like Trump is smart enough to understand that, but I do think there's people in his team that understand the maybe I'm wrong, and you guys will tell me later, but like I think but truly, like I think they understand that like we too could tap into their nationalism in a way that of course like many other people cannot do, no?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, thank you for that. And like I said, it just put everything into context of like how I had been feeling, and like again, it's like that claim and like that assimilation and all the colonization ideas through and through exemplified, and just understanding like, that claim to Spaniard and whiteness is so distinct and so direct, and I was so appreciative of that. I love that. Something else that really shocked me in the book was Miquel Armenta for the Laboratorios para Patos, and how, when he says, right, like, do you know what the most police gender is in Latin America? It's not femininity, it's actually masculinity. And so I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, and really, how does the patriarchy play into that?
I mean, let's even think of like this election.
Right.
Like Latino men Trump won their vote.
Yes.
Like, it wasn't even that it was split or it was like this. Again, this is according to exit polls, but he won the Hispanic men, Latino men vote. And so, I mean, there's many things. How do we make sense of that? And I mean,
Right.
it's also maybe we spend too much time. Like, maybe it's also a no-brainer. Like, why did so many men, and I'm sorry if you're here and you voted for him, but like, why did so many men, I'm kidding, I don't think so. But also it's okay.
I was like, who?
But also it would be okay. Like, this is non-political. No, it is.
It's not political.
No, it is. No, it isn't. Like, obviously we're no music. No, but truly, but like, but also like sometimes we're like scratching our head, but like I just, Harris, so many people felt uncomfortable around the idea of like a black woman in power.
Yeah.
And of course, and I think, yes, for a lot of Latino men, like that was part of it. But then what I saw very vividly, and then I would, you know, when we get into the discussion, like I'm so curious to see how it played out here in Chicago, but like where they really weaponized that was through the idea of transness, no? And trans people. And that they knew, not just with Latino men, but with men in general, no? And with a lot of people, they knew that could invoke this type of like moral panic that would make some men feel so insecure, you know, about the way that this country is changing so rapidly, and the changing dynamics and the changing gender dynamics, and like, what do you do with sexuality, and what do you do with this and that? And to be fair, you know, I think there's some truth to, emotionally at least, to like how, of course, like a lot of people are struggling, you know, they're struggling to like pay their bills and take care of their families. And I think that insecurity is very real. Right. But I think they, of course, weaponize that through, like you and I talked before, no? Yeah. Through this very simple idea of fear and disgust, no? Because the image that they kept trying to put in our heads was, 2, black Haitians are eating your pets. And then trans people are pedophiles, and trans people are, you know, like indoctrinating your children. And those were like, that was constantly in the orbit. Right. And I think with the trans thing, like that disgust, that image is the driving force of dehumanizing someone. Like, disgust is stronger than fear, and it is stronger than anger, and it literally gets people to go like this, no? And I think that worked really well, particularly among some men. That yes, like that feeling worked, but also, of course, like we carry all this too, no? Of course, from a Latin America where, yes, like for decades and centuries, like these norms have been institutionalized, and so much of the work that we do every day is just working through that. And I think we're still in the middle of it. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think we're still in the middle of it. I also, like, I don't know if loved is the right word, but I thought it was so interesting that concept that you said, that disgust is stronger than fear. Yeah. And that truly, I don't know, I sat with that for a while and really, really thought about it, because it is a key component in dehumanization, and why his rhetoric is so, why it works, and why it's so, like what we saw. Like,
and they do it all the time. Like, even now, RFK Jr. is literally going into campuses to try and talk about how anti-Semitism, I think he said this like on Friday or like last week, he talked about like anti-Semitism being a virus, no? And, you know, but there is, the logic there is, again, to link, no, like if you're pro-Palestinian or you're anyone that sort of defies what this government is about, it's the same thing. Right. It is to create the idea of X person to a virus. And they do this all the time, no? Gay people, AIDS, black migrants, I heard this all the time at the border, monkeypox, all the time. You know, Asian people, China virus, like it's a strategy that they use time and time and time again. No, it's discussed. It's because it works. It works really well.
Yeah, that is so crazy. I'm telling you, I never even considered like those aspects. Did you learn anything about yourself while writing Defectors, like specifically? And I know
so much. I mean, like no, yeah, of course. Well, okay, as a journalist, I think I've and I'm still learning, but I think I'm becoming like just a better listener. Right. You know? I think listening, I think we come into these conversations with questions, and I think and assumptions and biases at the end. But I think through listening, I think I was able to, and I don't think this is for everyone. I think it's a controversial thing to, and I get into these debates all the time with like an MSNBC or a Telemundo, like, is it worth it to give some of these people platforms? And I think there's a completely logical argument to say no. Like, who gains from that?
Right.
But I think I learned that through kind of this like curiosity, like I could find, not only could I humanize them, but it felt less scary to me, and more approachable. And yes, of course, about myself, I mean, all these questions of like growing up in a Miami that just looked like me, and there were no Black people in my Miami. Like, I made a lot of sense of my first feelings of going to college too, and finding my Latinidad and sort of finding my community, and I was able to understand like the why of it all. I learned a lot, I think, even about like how I dealt with my own queerness when I was like very young, and coming out, and why it took me so long, but why I felt so much shame for so many years. I learned so much about this hysteria within my family with like communism, and this truly like paranoid state of mind of like they're literally coming to, that this country is like slowly evolving into like communism. And I think it's very easy to laugh off, but then you understand that it is like, it's like this deep trauma, no? Yeah. So yeah, I learned a lot. So much.
Yeah, I love that. Is there a key takeaway that you would like for us as your readers to take away, like specifically from Defectors? I know like a lot of it has been so informative and like transformational, but is there something that Paola Ramos wants us to take away, like a key takeaway for Defectors?
I mean, I think at least I felt that before the election. Yeah. And rightly so, but I think there was this tendency to want to dismiss, this sort of small little phenomenon, and it is a small thing. No, we don't need. I don't want to sensationalize it. Like we're not all there. But again, I think it's important to have the curiosity to understand like why things are happening, because I do think that it has less to do with Trump, and more to do with a lot of things that all of us are holding into. And I think it manifests for us, obviously, like in very different ways, in smaller ways. We have friends and community to check ourselves, and that's so important, but not everyone has this. And so I do think the themes in this book, I think are things that all of us have encountered in different ways, no? The subtle racism, no? The uncle that doesn't welcome this trans person, or so I think it's stuff that that is important to talk about, and I think we often have a very hard time talking about these. I for sure have, and talking about like colorism and racism within us. Yes. So I hope that we can at least do a better job at just like engaging in these type of conversations and learning, being able to learn, to understand that we don't have all the answers to us and what it means to be us, and I think it's important to be open to learn more. Yeah.
And I love that. I mean, like, you have our testimony. That's exactly what this book caused in our community, in our book club. It was learning through that dialogue and that experience. And yes, it is small, but it's definitely important to understand, like, why this happened and how to almost, well, actually, that leads me to my next question. Like, how do we combat that? How do we, not have, well, I don't know if you can change their mind, it's pretty much set in stone, but to avoid.
I mean, I'm also curious though now. Like, I think one thing is like who Trump is in theory, and who he was during the campaign, and I think now we're understanding like truly what these words mean. And it's so in our face. Now we understand that of course he wasn't just going for the criminals, and also what does that even mean? Now we're understanding, we're seeing all these images, and so I keep coming back to that question, like, will there be a collective moral outrage? Will there be that? I think we saw it very vividly in 2018 during like family separation. I think this country came together when we saw families being separated at the border, and that's literally, I mean, that's happening now on campuses, like on our streets. And so I'm waiting for this like collective feeling that perhaps brings us back together in a different way. And and this is where I would love to ask a million questions, because I'm so curious to see like if you guys see that happening here already or not, or
Yeah. And just to close out the conversation between us, in what ways could we encourage our youth to dive into their cultural identity and not fall into the traps of Trumpism or political fear tactics or propaganda? I know that's a big question, but I would love to get your insight.
How to not fall into Trumpism?
Yeah. Or like encourage our youth to not be, again, like to fall
I mean,
into
look
that
at your
stuff.
beautiful book club, no, but truly, like finding pride.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, and even this space, like this space, no, finding spaces that remind you of like the beauty of who you are, and that there's no shame in being who you are, and like having these like incredible references everywhere. Like this is like, these are the images that we need to be seeing. No, we're being fed so much stuff.
Yeah.
And like I've become such a cynical person, so like it's bad. Like my mental health is not good right now, but like at all. But truly, like being like I honestly like I almost sighed in relief when I came here, because I truly can't remember the last time that maybe 4 months ago, but I can't remember the last time that I was in like a space like this, in a community like this, and being surrounded by like art and history, and reminding myself of like, okay, yeah, like, there is, there, like, going back to this idea of like the American dream that I was talking about, like, it's a cheesy phrase, but dreams and images is what I think drives us to be better versions of ourselves, no? And so without it, it's hard, it's hard to understand like where we're headed or what we're supposed to be, and like this helps me so much. So that's a terrible answer, but like, I don't know, come to the museum.
Come to the museum.
That's it. Go to your book
it.
club. No, truly, I don't know. Yeah.
No, that's awesome.
And I'm sure you have a better answer than I do. So this, because you're like,
Paola, please. No. No, it definitely, I know it resonates, and yeah, it's exactly that. It's, tapping into your identity, being curious. The curiosity, keeping that alive, and like not tying it to any political party or any affiliation like that, but being like, where do I come from? Where are my ancestors from? Where, just retaining that curiosity, I think really, again, is a key factor in cultivating community. Okay, so we would like to take some questions now from you guys. So please raise your hand. I don't know how we should do that. Go ahead. Yeah, come up.
So, hi, thank you for sharing space with us today. And I liked a few of the things that you touched upon, especially in your introduction. You talked about holding on to this empathy, but as I was reading your book, like I had a hard time holding on to my empathy for some of the individuals and folks that you were interviewing, especially, we've all read the book, hopefully, so Anthony.
No,
so how
I don't
do you,
expect
as a
that,
Latina, how do you hold on to your empathy, your cool, your sanity, even like your generosity when you're engaging with these, like when you're going with him on like this, border patrol, and how you talk to Isabella in her salon, or even Daniel when you're sitting with him at a cafe. How do you hold on to that empathy and not kind of want to like, I kept wanting to like get into my own, like, let's talk about this fantasy, like how do you struggle to kind of hold yourself back and just like listen? How do you like keep your empathy for these folks that you're interviewing? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I mean, look, it's not, the time that I almost lost it was it was the weekend before the election, and I was in Arizona, I was in Phoenix, and I was interviewing someone, and I was interviewing this person, and then someone comes up, and he had a gun. It was an open carry, and to the point of like the disgust and all this and how it's manifested, like the guy just kept staring at me while I was like doing my interview. And I usually try never to, I don't like to disrupt the flow, so I kept going, but he just kept like, I can't do it well, but he was just like with a sense of like grossness and disgust. And then I had to stop everything. I was like, I didn't do what you just did. No, I didn't do that. But I was like, can I help you? And all he said, and I think that's what I felt, what I feel many times when you're interviewing people like that, all he said is, there's just something about you. That's all he said. There's something about you that like, meh. And I don't know where I'm going with this, other than like that, like I feel that a lot. from a lot of people. But then there are moments, particularly when like the cameras are off and I'm not like writing and stuff, like to bring Enrique back, right? There are moments where like when nothing is around us that like I feel like he understands and I understand, like I can understand. It's not that perhaps I have empathy, but like I can understand where this comes from because I think that it comes from like pain, pain of not really knowing where you belong, pain of like trying to find something better, pain of, for lack of a better word, like being a loser and then suddenly like finding like this power. Like again, that is not politics. Like that is just, that's like heart psychology and like that's something else. And so sure, like Trump is like I said, like Trump kind of brings this out in people, but I don't know. Like and I don't have a good answer because I think you're gonna get very different responses from different journalists. Like there's a lot of my colleagues would never do those type of things, no? Mm-hmm. Because those people don't merit spaces and don't merit platforms. And there's a lot of truth to that. I am on this journey to like, and I'm on a break now, you're like, I can't talk to so many people right now. But I am on a, like, I think I learned so much more understanding where it all comes from instead of just like dismissing people, es un trumpista, or no, he's just a radical person. Yeah, I don't know.
Awesome. Thank you. More questions? Yep, come on.
Hi, Paola. My name is Sandra. I think it's more of a comment than a question, but also maybe a question. I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for your book. I was very intrigued reading it, also listening to it via audiobook, which is super dope. Thank you for providing language to and context to a lot of the phenomenons that we know are happening. But also particularly here in Chicago, we got a lot of migrants coming into our city, and I was listening and hearing about a lot of anti-migrant hate, especially from my own community, which is the Mexican community, which also happened to be undocumented. So to me, it was very like, what? Like, you know, people are seeking refuge. Like, you should know this. And so I would like to hear your thoughts in regards to that phenomenon. I think you speak about it a little bit. And also just thank you for uplifting that, you know, Latinos have a lot of different identities and that we don't vote in unison, that we all have different experiences and different privileges. And so, yeah, we'd just like to hear your thoughts.
For sure. Thank you for reading the book and listening to it. So I think there's like a couple things, and if anyone has, because I think in Chicago you guys are probably living it differently. I think we experienced something very similar in New York City. And I think New York City, I think the story was always like, you know, New York City is this sanctuary city, as is Chicago, no? Yep. And I think in theory, that made a lot of people feel good about themselves. Because in theory, we're a city that welcomes immigrants. And then the story became, okay, so immigrants finally arrived in New York City. And I think to your point, you started to see the way that even the most progressive, one thing is in theory being for these concepts, the other thing is like facing it. And then you really test these values. No? Then you really test your empathy and you really test the compassion. And I think something happened. You're right, like it snapped. Like there's some people that like were so deeply uncomfortable by the presence of like immigrants and asylum seekers around them. So I think there was like that happened coupled with we like truly tested our values. And like I said, like when you really do that, you learn a lot about people. You learn a lot about people and your politicians and your leaders, coupled with a rhetoric that was almost like, it just spread like wildfire, you know, this idea that like migrants were here and they were criminals and they were stealing your jobs. And I think that got to people because you have this Republican candidate that every day was just saying, they're invading you. A lot of people believed it, you know? Progressives, Republicans, Democrats, the most progressives of Democrats in New York were running some of the most anti-immigrant campaigns. So that's just like, it resonated with them. And then I think to your point, and then there's the idea of like, can immigrants be against immigrants? Yes, of course. Like this idea that because, you know, we're immigrants or the descendants of immigrants, that somehow makes us immune to xenophobia. We believe that to be true, but that's just not, unfortunately, it's not true. And so just to at least like accept that, no? Because that's where we learn. Like, of course we're not immune to like the xenophobic rhetoric. And then you start kind of like parsing out. In fact, in Florida, for instance, like when Ron DeSantis sent migrants from the border to Martha's Vineyard, what the surveys in Florida showed is that not only was he deeply backed by all the demographics across Florida, he was mostly backed by Latinos and by immigrants, mostly backed. And so I think, I mean, there's so much there, no? So I think there's the layer of like, of course, like why would you want to lump yourself with a group of people that is being completely targeted and criminalized? And the theories and the research shows that there are so many people out there that believe that approximating yourself with your community lowers your social status. You know, and that's been deeply researched, so that's why there's this tendency to desegregate yourself from immigrants, to not be lumped into that, because again, we're in a country where like, I mean, it's become the biggest scapegoat. So there's that going on. And then the last thing I'll say is I heard a lot of undocumented folks, for instance, in Arizona and in Nevada, holding a lot of real resentment towards asylum seekers. And forget Trump for a second, I think there's like this very real disillusionment from a Democratic Party that I think for many years has been promising these things and running on these promises and running on these, you know, values. And I think a lot of people feel very like they're done. No, they're done waiting. And so I think simply the pure optics of like, you know, and I think again, like the Republicans did it really well. The optics of like, oh, there's asylum seekers that are coming and they're getting these like housings, coupled with the real disillusionment, coupled with like the fear mongering, like it was the perfect storm to like pit us against each other, you know? But there's so much there, and that's ongoing. I mean, I cannot believe that from all the crap that is happening right now, the most popular agenda in this administration continues to be immigration, from everything. Like he's down in every single numbers with the exception of immigration. So they've cracked something there, you know?
Yeah, definitely figured it out. Yeah, that was super shocking to me too. Again, like, you know, I'm a proud daughter of immigrants, and really that shaped a lot of my life. But seeing that our immigrants also like, you know, have so much hate towards the new immigrants, and like dismantling that again at the ground level. So yeah, it was.
And again, I think it's a minority. Thank you so much. I think it's a minority, you know? Like I think again, like I don't want to like, the majority of people don't feel that. No, the majority of people are empathetic. Like there's a real, you know, and also to not underestimate like the incredible work from like grassroots organizers that have been holding the community for decades and like have been preparing for these moments, and like they know what's up, no? And so that's the majority. I think what we're seeing is still alarming, because we're not used to it, and it still is happening. But I don't want to take away from like, you know, the real work.
I love that. Go ahead.
Hello, thank you, Paola, for being here, and thank you, Stephanie, for asking very important questions. I followed your work with Vice News very closely, and I was very appreciative. I feel like Vice News for a long time has been reporting on like super, like honestly, like questions that I wouldn't even ask myself, but like just topics that introduces a lot of people to. But I wanted to ask the question of like, what do you think the limitations of current popular media are, like news outlets, and like how do you see the media landscape changing? Quick anecdote, I just feel like recently I don't even find myself like watching MSNBC anymore.
Obviously, I don't blame you.
I don't watch CNN.
I mean, you and everyone else, no one's watching that.
It just feels like there's no like genuine interest to like to really report on like the pain and the hurt that people are feeling, just trying to be like the opposite of what Trump is. And so like, how do you see, what are the limitations of popular media right now that you see through your eyes? And how do you see the media landscape changing, or what do you feel needs to change for there to be like, you know, for us to get better news and better information?
I think that's a great question. I'm in the thick of it now, trying to understand the answers. I think there's a couple of realities. No, for instance, like even talking about Vice News is gone. Vice News died. Vice died like a year ago, And it was a reflection of every other sort of digital outlet out there that was trying to do like good field work. The beauty of Vice, I mean, and unfortunately, I don't think I'll ever have a job like that ever again, where like they literally gave us the resources that we needed to have to tell good stories. I don't think I will ever have a job that allows me to do that, and that's really sad, and I think that's what we're all wrestling with. No, they would allow us time and space, go to the field, and if you take 7 days, that's okay. The problem is there's no more resources to do that, at least right now. And so the power we're finding out is actually still in mainstream media, because that's where the money is. And so then we're talking about these institutions that while all the money is there, because it's sort of fueled by ads, it's a dying audience. Like that audience is dying. So like an MSNBC audience is mostly like 60 plus, no? So that's just kind of the landscape of it all. And then within these institutions, what you find is that, at least in cable news and mainstream media, like the room to do kind of the long form reporting is very minimal, no? Because people in those type of newscasts, like your attention span, what the metric does not allow for those formats anymore. It just doesn't. Like people aren't consuming 5-minute pieces, and they rather you speak in sound bites. And that, again, that's a reality of like where we are in the industry. But what did we really learn also is that as it's a dying media industry, I think what Trump taught us really well is that you no longer need to go to those spaces to inform the masses, because the masses are actually in the podcast world and in the TikTok world and in the Instagram world, and I think where there was this massive blind spot, and I was part of that blind spot, no? Speaking in MSNBC and Telemundo and this and that, we were talking to a bubble that's like this, while completely ignoring the power of the Joe Rogans of the world. And it is in those spaces where people speak candidly, where Trump and I think a lot of Republicans do something that I think a lot of like Democrats and progressives don't do, which is just talk freely, talk for 3 hours. And that one interview he did in October had over like 25 million views instantly. Yes. And that's where it is. And if you look at just like the landscape of like the media like bubbles and where people are, they're starting to go, it's the right-wing podcasts and the right-wing influencers. And I don't think, and I'm saying the liberal media, but I hate that word, but I don't think in this other side, like I don't think they have figured out how to monetize that. They just haven't, because the right has been, for years, has been building these platforms and investing and investing and investing, and now we're seeing how fruitful it is. And so to your point, like I just say like I just follow like my favorite journalists, and I follow them on everywhere. And I've learned that like I can't do just MSNBC. Like I have to be on TikTok, and I have to be on Instagram, and I have to like just have to do everything until we figure out like what's the new iteration of Vice. So to answer your question, like it's depressing. It's really bad. It's bad. It's hard. It's a hard time in media. It's a very hard time. And we didn't even get into the sort of the outside pressure of what it means to be a journalist today, no? In these institutions, and with an administration that is attacking companies in a very very dangerous and scary way. So that's a whole other story.
Maybe 2 more questions. You'll go ahead and answer.
Thank you for being here and for being so real with us.
Yeah. No.
I'm also very grateful that you wrote a book, that you were willing to take the risks of so many aspects of yourself, including your humanity, in writing this book, and in also making yourself very vulnerable by talking about your own sort of identity exploration as part of that process. And my question is sort of personal, but I have like 15, so I'll just ask the one. There's a thread of sense of belonging, right, throughout the entire book. It's, I think, like you said, and like many of us feel, what we all look for.
Yeah.
I'm curious about like where you feel that sense of belonging, and as it relates to that and your own sort of identity exploration. Like many of us, eres de aquí y de allá, right? Even just talking about the type of Spanish that you speak. I'm curious how you think, like naturally, how do you think? Is it English and Spanish? Is it Spanglish? Is it both? How do you naturally sort of speak? How do you naturally write? Like, are you translating? Are you in Spanglish? I'm just curious.
Those are
about
good
that
questions.
too.
Okay, so I think I do my math in Spanish. I was a better writer. So my English was so bad when I came here that I had to do like ESL classes when I was 17. And so I mostly thought in Spanish until I was 25, and then it flipped. And now I can barely, I mean, I can write in Spanish, but I can barely, like I would never be able to write a book in Spanish. So I can only now write in English. But I will tell you, like, even when I have to do like TV hits and this and that, like I prepare a lot because I, you know, and there's kind of the like imposter syndrome that happens all the time, no? When you asked about, you know, finding your voice, maybe I should have been a little bit even more frank. Like, yes, we have power, but like it's still hard, no? And so I think when I'm in those spaces, like I prepare a lot in English, you know, because I still have this thing that like, oh, my English isn't as good as like their English, or I can't like, you know, I can't, you know, some people like, how do I say this? No. No. I was trying to be PC, but I don't think I'm gonna say it. No. Anyways, like, como que se sueltan de una manera that I can't, like, sometimes when you're hearing like some cable news people, they're, you know, like they can just talk about everything all the time, and it's like such a, I don't know how else to describe it, and I'm like, I've always, from afar, I'm like, wow, it's such a, like, an American phenomenon, no? That you can just like talk about everything all the time. But to me, it was such a foreign concept, because growing up, I don't know, for me, it was like you only open your mouth when you have something good to say, or like raise your hand, or like just culturally, you know. It's always like you respect, and so I think I'm in this, like, and we're all in this culture where like you just talk all day long about everything, and so that's been a struggle to like come up with, you know. And then the belonging, for sure, like I think I've struggled for many years to like find fully myself, like where I can, you know, be fully comfortable, you know, around, you know, being queer, and be fully comfortable in my interviewing style, or be fully comfortable that, like, it's taking me a while, but I think I'm in a good spot where like I don't, you know, I can bring it all together, and that feels good, you know, without having to like, you know, hide parts of you all the time. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but at least you made me think a lot about things that I have to think about. So I'm gonna be thinking about that later for sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Honestly, my name is Cyan, and it's an honor to meet you. Especially, I found your work extremely commendable, because I know it's hard to meet people where they're at, especially those with far-right ideologies. Earlier, you were talking about pushing facts and truth, and I wanted to ask you, well, two questions. But the first one, I wanted to ask you how you define those things, or how you go about those things, because based on the person, those things can be based on, like, you know, be interpreted differently, or like everyone has their own interpretation of truth and fact. So how do you go about those things?
It shouldn't be that way.
And it shouldn't be that way.
No. And honestly, like we're all figuring it out. Like it should not, like it should not be that way. But you're right. I mean, all I know is that in every story or even commentary or stupid TikTok video that I do, like I truly, like, I bring in the facts all the time, and like that's the only weapon that I have right now to, and it's not even I'm not pushing any ideologies or pushing anything. I'm just like it's just a matter of like journalism today, like every single thing that you say has to have facts, because if not, like, you know, there's, yeah, I mean, I'm struggling because it feels like an insurmountable problem at this point. Trying to talk to someone that like believes that the Constitution allows a president to run for a third time, like that is factually incorrect. No, so how do we explain like the Constitution? I'm gonna go back, and so again, like how do you explain the idea of like, you know, what the Alien Enemies Act actually means? And so that's what I'm saying. Like so our job, all we can do is like, here's what it says. Here's how the law defines what it means to be invaded, what it means to like, and so every single thing that comes out of my mouth on TV, on air, on TikTok is followed by facts, and it's not all I can hope for, but that is what I have to do, and that's the job. I mean, I can't convince anyone if they think that the sky is purple, but that's where we're at.
For my second question, you said that you learned a lot about yourself when you were writing this book and doing your journalism work. So I wanted to ask you, how do you go about decolonizing your mind past reformity? Like digging deep for that decolonization.
Like what would that look like?
Like just going about because I know all the time a lot of answers that we go about is like, oh, we can just reform what we have, like reform the things that a lot of the ideologies that we have are based on. So like, how do you, given the things that you faced while doing this journalism work, like how do you go about decolonizing your everyday life or how you view the world?
I mean, I try my best to learn as much as I possibly can, to learn as much as I possibly can about the privilege that I have every single day, to learn as much as I can about like how I take up spaces when I'm giving the spaces, to learn as much as I can about the shit that I didn't know when I was younger and like the community that I didn't have back then. I think I try and be super intentional around, I'm very proud of like the community that I have and like the voices that I surround myself with. Like I think I put a lot of care and love into like, surrounding myself with people that hold me accountable. I think that's super important, having friendships and loved ones that like hold you accountable. Yeah, and also I think I know that I don't have the answers to many things, and I see my job as one, like I said before, like without the curiosity to being okay to learning and being wrong, and being and doing better. Like I think that's I strive for that. Yeah. Yeah. No, and thank you for that question.
Awesome. So just on the final question, because we are part of the book club, I would like to ask you, what is one of your favorite books?
I think Jonathan Blitzer's Everyone That Is Gone Is Here. Okay. Yeah. I think that book has really, I thought it was like beautifully done. I think he's such an incredible writer. So yeah, I think that one.
I love that.
What about you?
I'm gonna say
don't do not. I was like, don't lie. No, come on.
I did like Defectors.
Nah,
it was amazing. Gloria Ansaldúa, Borderlands on Nueva Justicia. I love that book. That book changed my life. So I recommend you read it. Yes, there's some things that we could debate about, but it is an amazing book, and it completely changed the trajectory of how I viewed identity, how I viewed myself, how I viewed just everything, colonization, decolonization, assimilation, de-assimilation. So I love that book. Paola, anything else that you would like to add?
No, just to thank you. Thank you for putting so much intention and thought into the conversation, for being so open, and thank you guys for like being, even just still being awake, like truly. I mean, no, this is super beautiful, so thank you for taking the time.
Of course. A round of applause,
Thank
please.
you. Thank you.